So now let's go into a little bit more depth in terms of doing the same stuff as we have already done, like emitting the fire on a particular location, on spawning it actually on a particular location for that actor itself. Let's say that we would like to have instead of the fire to be spawning here, we would like to spawn the fire particles somewhere at the top of this particular box itself. So let's see how we can do that. So if we click on the cube here, and if you scroll down, and you can see on the left panel itself, you have a variable which you have a component which is actually created for the cube, and you can actually click and drag it and get cube. Now on the get cube, we would like to actually get the location of this particular cube in our world, so that we can actually emit these particles on that particular location over the cube itself. To do that, if you drag here and type get world location, this is the function. So what essentially it is doing is that it is taking the cube as a target, and it is identifying that wherever the location of this cube is, and it is changing that information in the return value as a form of vector. So now, same as what we have get actor location, if you see, the get actor location is only specified for the actual blueprint, which is our my new actor, and my new actor is actually an actor of blueprint type. So it is getting the location of that one, and that's where it is spawning, and that's why you see the fire showing up in the middle of this particular collision box, which is having the root box as the root. Now in our case, in this case, if you look at it in the cube, we have got a new vector value, and if we connect that one to this particular point in the same way, and what it is going to do now actually is that it's going to take the location of the cube, it's going to add 200 points to the z-axis, and of course then it's going to create a vector out of it and then actor. So this emitter is going to show up somewhere above the actual cube in our scene. So let's click compile and let's play and see what happens. So let's move through the collision, and there you go. So now what you have done is actually you have spawned the particles somewhere at the top of the cube, which is on the other side. So if you remember in the previous tutorial, I explained that you may require to do some actions, like in our case in the particle system, to show up somewhere else rather than its exact location where the root of this particular actor is of our blueprint. So this is how, as an example, I'm able to give you an understanding how you can actually achieve that one. Now, some distinctions which you need to understand also, that once you have a get actor location, although it has a target input and there's nothing connected to it, because we have a self means that getting the actor location basically of your actor of the blueprint, which is a blueprint of that location, and changing into and getting the vector out of it. In case of the cube itself, you will not have this function because it is not relevant to the cube. So let's try to understand how this is actually working, and this is a concept of inheritance. So if you click on the cube now, and if you right click and say get world location, so you see, because our cube is in the scene itself, we get the function called world location cube. Okay. However, if you type get actor location in this case, and if you type that one, select that one, it will still get you that particular function, but it will not allow you to, let's say if I want to bring the cube in By the way, you can either drag from here or you can even drag from here. And if you try to plug in now to this particular node, you say that static mesh component object reference is not compatible with object reference. So what's happening now here? Now the actor here exactly is our blueprint, and that has inherited what you call the properties from the parent class actor. Now this cube is not incompatible and doesn't have the same properties as the actor has, and that's why it is not allowing us to connect. That's why get actor location will not work with the cube. It will only work with the cube, the functions which are very specific to the cube itself. So get world location again. If you click that one, now you are able to see that it is actually connecting, and this is how it is going to connect back to our vector itself. And let's try to actually do some more thing. And if I disconnect basically, okay, get world location. So if I try to compile, you see an error message here. See, even though we are having a self here, but what's happening is, because this function is relevant to the cube and not to the actor, we are getting a compiler error which is saying this blueprint self is not a scene component. So scene box as a root, or my new actor as new SSU is actually the self. It is not actually the component. The components are actually under the my new actor as itself. So these are the so that's why we are getting an error. So if we bring back again and link it to the target and try to compile, you see, okay, now it works, because now Unreal Engine understands that what actually is the target is actually a scene component here, and that's why it is actually, as a part of the overall scene itself, it is adding to linking to the target, and it is getting the location for that particular thing and able to connect back to it. So there is no compiling error in this one, and this is how how actor locations and world location differ from each other in a blueprint. So we'll move forward in the next topic now. So let's say now, since we have done 3 types of emitting the fire, one was for the actor, one was for the cube location, but let's say you don't want to actually do on either of these. You don't want to actually emit those particular fire particles on either of these locations. You want to show up somewhere else within your scene itself. To do that, there is something called scene component. Scene component. And if you have scene component, if you go back to the scene, you will see a scene component is added to it. Now the scene component has by default nothing in it, and you cannot actually assign any kind of, if you see on the right side, you cannot assign any kind of static mesh to it. You can have its location, rotation, scaling, and all those things, but it will be invisible in your scene, and it won't be showing up anywhere in the location. It's anywhere in the game itself. So, but we can make a use of it. By the way, as I explained to you, your cube is your scene component, your box is your scene component, and of course your scene component is your scene component, but this time it's without any static mesh in it. So let's go back and click in the event graph, and if we want to actually drag in the scene, and we just drop it here. So if you bring the scene here now, and instead of the cube, you plug in scene. So now what it should happen is that the get world location will work with the scene. It will break the vector at 200 units to the z axis of the scene itself, or the scene component, create a vector again, and then particular location, and do the same thing over and over again. So now if we see in the viewport again, let's see where is our scene component. It is somewhere here, and I'll just try to place it somewhere here. Let me a little bit on this side so that will become obvious, and we'll compile it and we go back to our game and let's try to play it here again. Now our fire particle should not show up on the cube or the collision cube, it should show somewhere else. And there you go. You see now, if you move and scroll back again, okay, that's too fast. And okay, so that's here. So this is where now you see that you can use the scene components of your blueprint, and you can do variable things based on based on the location, by getting the location for that particular component. And by the way, if you see here, when we started the project and we added the blueprint, if we go back to the blueprint again and just type and like put blueprint class and select actor and just give it some name, dummy, and double click in it. By default, there is something called default scene root. We had a default scene root already available into it. However, this cannot be moved because it is a root component of itself. So I will just delete back just to give an example and delete it itself. So now what we have learned about the scene component, that how we can add scene components to it. We can do multiple things related to it. Let's say we have a game and these components, scene components, are at multiple different directions and multiple locations also. And you want to, let's say, create an interactive lighting system, and you want to actually spawn instead of an emitter, but maybe some spotlights. So you can emit a spotlight at certain location of the scene, which is not actually a component which is not a visible component in your scene, and your spotlights will start coming up at different directions. I mean, you can become very artistic in your overall gaming development as well. You can use it for many different purposes. It's just related to your imagination to what extent you can go. So I think we conclude here in terms of our this particular overlapping and components and particle system, and we will move to our next topic and further to get more into detail and how we can further enhance our blueprint by adding more functionalities to it.